Next, we're going to go back to Dennis Pennington and Mark Stubbs, and they're going to dig into some of the details on the yen program and maybe some of the similarities that we're seeing between the U.S. yen program or our yen program and the UK yen program.
So the goal here is to do, I've got a little bit of kind of background information that I wanted to share with everybody, and then I kind of sort of want to have like a discussion, I guess, with Mark and I talking a little bit about kind of what we're seeing in the yen in the U.S. as well as what you're seeing. We might come back and pull some of your data up.
Yep.
And put it up on the screen. But can you hear that okay? All right. So let me just set the stage if I can, and then we'll get into some data. So the goal is to produce high yield. Does anybody have a wheat field that looks like this one here? Yeah, everybody. Oh, yeah, that's my field right there, right? Yeah. This is Take Credit Tuesday. So, anyway, so this is actually a field in Germany. When I went to Germany here back, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and so they can grow some pretty good wheat there as well. But Mark, I was actually at your farm, and I think it looked pretty close to that right there. Notice everything's green. All of these leaves are green in here.
Yeah.
Got great big heads, a lot of spikelets per head, and just some phenomenal wheat. And so the question is, can we do that here? Can we grow that kind of wheat here? So the goal behind producing a high yield crop is to produce a crop that can maximize the capture of solar radiation, water, and uptake of nutrients. Okay, it starts from planting, and you got to manage the crop all the way through to harvest in order to get those high yields. And the goal is to get that plant to start early, get a good root system developed, keep that plant healthy through the spring and through stem elongation, and make sure it has the resources it needs during the grain fill period so it doesn't run out of gas. So I know we have weather conditions that we have to face, and sometimes that is an issue, but that is the goal behind here, because the biomass, the crop canopy you produce, that is your factory. That's what captures the photosynthesis, converts it to energy for the crop to grow and develop and produce high yield. So I want to give you just a bit of historical results from the yen, the Great Lakes yen. So this is the last 4 years, 21 through 24. You can see the number of participants in that second column that Jody mentioned. So I wanted to bring up that third column, this range in yields. So the range in yields, notice, goes from 66 to 153, 55 to 166, and so on. We don't have all just high yield growers in this yen program. The overall average is about 115 bushels per acre, 115, 116 depending on the year. So overall average is good, but we also have some growers that are in this program not because they want to win, but because they want to do a better job of growing wheat. And I have not yet met a grower that would not like to increase their yields. I haven't met one yet. Everybody would like to get a better yield. So the question is how? What do we have to do? And then these are the top 3 yields. So we can see we've got some good numbers that, 10 years ago, I'll bet you people in Michigan would have said there's no way you can get those numbers in Michigan. And I see pictures on Twitter and our WhatsApp group of guys that are hitting even higher on their yield monitor in some places in these fields, but that's not the average of the field. So
if I could just add to like the participants and that, we're the same in the UK where we have got really low ones and high ones. Yes, for me, I'm up there with the high ones, and yes, it's nice to win because it gives me opportunities like this to come and talk to you guys. But for me, it's not about the winning and that, it's about the information I've gained over the years throughout yen. So I had started my journey back home 15, 20 years ago to start increasing yields. my jump happened once I started in yen, and I started learning from these higher yielding people what they was doing. I then started implementing some of their ideas on my farm, and then little tweaks and that started to bring my yields up a lot quicker. So it isn't about the winning, it's about the knowledge which you will all receive.
Okay, so what I want to do next is I'll share with you some of the things that I think are critical to getting high yield in Michigan at least, and we'll see how they match up with what you think in your neck of the woods. So first thing is we have to plant on time. If you're planting late, you'll lose yield potential, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So planting on time is the first key. That means you have to manage your crop system, your entire rotation, in a way that allows you to plant on time, okay? So what is on time? We'll talk about that in a minute. Another thing, you've got to, at harvest time, you need to end up with a high head count, okay? And our growers are getting, the winners are getting in that 900 plus heads per meter squared.
Yeah, that's what we're getting. Like mine was 850 something.
Yeah. Okay. So the head density is similar, but you're getting 246 bushels.
Yeah.
Our top guys are getting 170. So there's still some differences here. So we got to figure out what those are. So the next is high biomass. I did the conversion on yours. It was 23 or 26 tons per hectare, and that came out to it was like 22,500 pounds per acre. Our high yield guys are producing 17,000 pounds of biomass. So there's 5,000 pounds difference, so that's probably close to 30%. You have about 30% higher biomass than what our high yield guys are. So that's another thing, because the more biomass, that's your factory, right?
That's correct, yeah.
You got a 30% bigger factory to build yield than what we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are some practices that I think every farm should do. You need to split your nitrogen application. You need to add sulfur if you're not adding sulfur. And you need to at least put a T3 fungicide on. Now, in this neck of the woods where we are, we grow a lot of soft white winter wheat. In almost all soft white winter wheat growers are putting a T3 fungicide on. I'll show you some data in the end in a little bit here that shows what happens to yield when you put 2 fungicides on or 3 fungicides on. But
so on the fungicide, so Dennis is emphasising T3 fungicide. In the UK, our main fungicide is T2. Now, I don't know if T2 is your flag leaf?
Flag leaf, correct.
So it's the same as us in the UK. So the flag leaf is the biggest, is the leaf you need to protect the most, because that's the one which is going to give you yield. Now, I don't know about chemical side, so Eric, if I could just ask you, so for rust, which you was emphasising a lot on, do you have tebuconazole as a active?
Yes.
Yeah, that is a chemistry in some of the fungicides for FHB and that you would apply.
Yeah. So I know that you was emphasising a lot on rust. Your rust strain may be different to ours, but it sounded very similar. So for me, my main disease I look out for is septoria. I don't know if you have septoria.
We have septoria.
So septoria, you cannot cure it. You've got to keep septoria down. So we'll maybe start on a T0. I try not to do a T0. So if I've got rust at T0, I wouldn't personally be concerned. If I've got septoria at T0, that's when my spray program starts. Because for me, if I've got rust in my plant, I could go and look and see some of the slides which Eric put up. Some of them severe rust slides I've had in my crop. I've gone in with tebuconazole and literally got rid of that rust within a week. It's disappeared. So if you see the rust, you can cure it and that. So personally, I wouldn't spray for rust as an insurance, but if you see it, you spray for it. Our insurance things is the Septoria, so that starts our spray program. So we would start, if I got it at T0, I would start a T0 spray, then 3 to 4 weeks later in that, I would then use a T1, and then 3 to 4 weeks after that, I'd go to T2, and T2 would be my biggest spend. So T0 would be very cheap, T1 would be a little bit more expensive, but cheap. T2 would be my expensive spend. That's the main one. I want to keep that flag leaf clean. And then T3, we also get fusarium, but the fusarium for us isn't as critical and yield sapping as it is for you guys, I don't think, by talking to Dennis in some of our conversations. It is, and we will get rejections for it. And like Dennis was talking about all the dons and everything, we do exactly all that the same, and we will get rejections. But what I find difficult with T3 is that's at flowering period. Now, you might have a bit wider extension window, I don't know, but for us in the UK, we've probably got a 3-day window to make that T3 fungicide work for the fusarium. We'd probably look at using T3 if we've got late rust in there and brown, and we've got a high yielding variety which if I had presented it in that year I would have come second, and I didn't enter yen this year due to the weather factors and that. I wouldn't have learnt anything, but I still went to the meeting, and my neighbour, he won yen, and he's one of the farms which a lot of you will be visiting when you come to the UK. And he used this variety which we call Champion, and it tillers really well, but it is bad for brown rust, and the brown rust doesn't come in till late. So that's T3, and then we'd use the tebuconazole again at T3. So our focus is more on the leaf. We do focus on the head, but maybe not as much, but that's probably our climate being slightly different to the US climate.
And I would say, related to that, our flowering window is a little bit wider. You mentioned like a 3-day period, but if you're looking at wheat like this, do you see small little heads that are farther behind here? Can you pick out small little tiller heads? No, like we can find here. Yeah, so we might have, the main stem flowering at like say day 0, and we might have the smaller heads on that same plant flowering a couple days or even 3 days later, so that spreads that window out of timing where fusarium head blight can infect this.
Yeah, I agree with that. The reason I say the 3-day thing is more for the chemical we have. I can't remember which chemical it is off the top of my head without Googling it and looking back in my notes. Presumably you would have maybe the same chemical ingredients for it, I'm not sure. But I find that the active doesn't work very long, and that I find it only is working for the 3 days, and that, so to get it into the open flowering period, for it to stay and work and that, you could still end up with, use it and still end up with fusarium. You would have protected as percentage, but you could still end up with it.
Yep. So I'll keep the discussion going here because we got a bunch to get through here.
Yeah.
So the next thing I put up here, you got to have a complete nutrition program evaluation. Okay, you know what you're putting out there. How many of you are doing any testing at all on what's in the tissue? Anybody doing any tissue testing? Okay, some. Everybody, I assume you're doing soil testing. Probably some grid sampling or sampling by regions or management zones and that kind of thing, and you're making variable rate applications of nutrients? Yeah, okay, I would hope so. So those are things to get your nutrition out there, but how do you know if it worked? What testing should you be doing to know if it worked? You need to test the grain. Okay, what ended up in the grain and what ended up in the straw? So that's one of the things that we do in the end. It's the post-mortem evaluation of what's in the grain. So you need to look at this critically the whole thing, because probably crop nutrition, probably the vast majority of everybody here has a nutrition problem of some sort on their farm they just don't know about yet, because they're not doing enough testing. Timing, timing, timing. All the way from selecting your varieties, getting your seed delivered, getting your planter in the field or your drill in the field at the right time, to hitting your fungicide timings properly, when you do your splits on your nitrogen application, when you start your harvest. Timing on all of that stuff is important. I hear time and time again, well, I got to stop the combine in order to go do this, in order to plant my wheat. You know, I'd like to finish up this soybean field, but now I got to go plant wheat, or whatever the scenario is. If you don't want to treat wheat like a real crop and manage it, and it's low priority, don't expect good things out of it or higher yields out of it. You have to manage it, and it will respond. The other thing that's important in what I've learned in working with these high yield growers is they are great detectives. Okay? They can walk out in their field and look at their crop. They put the shovel in the ground, they dig in the soil, they feel of it, and they can identify problems. They try new things on their farm. They test new equipment, new technology, new products, and they're always looking for, okay, I'm going to try something new on my farm this year. I'm going to do the strip with and without, and then we'll test it with the yield monitor at the end to know, did it work or not. A lot of growers that I talk to say, oh no, I just did the entire thing because I don't have time to mess with a strip that's untreated. Well, how are you going to know if it worked or not? How do you know if that's something you should do on your farm on a regular basis? You've got to take a little bit of time to manage this crop. That's part of what farming is all about.
And also, just to add to that, don't do too many things at once. So I've now been doing it 15, 20 years, and I always try something new every year. Sometimes I'll maybe try two things, or I'll try something new in one field and then something different in another field. So in the minute I feel like I've hit a plateau, I'm happy now on how I've got my soil health and that. I've just got to keep it on that. So what I'm trying this year is I'm adding molasses to my liquid nitrogen. So I'm putting 250 litres per hectare of liquid nitrogen at 22%, 10% sulphur, and I'm adding 10 litres per hectare of molasses, which is a carbon type fixation thing. The main aim of that, I know that it will help scorch. So if I'm putting my liquid fertiliser on and it's a bit windy, the leaves are rubbing like that, you'll get scorch. Flag leaf's a very important time because you don't want to scorch your flag leaf. There's other factors which will cause it. The sugars in it, in theory, is supposed to help the plant. Because I've got good healthy soils, I need to feed them soils. So I need to feed the bacteria, the fauna, or the fungus, so the sugars will do that. But on the flip side, so I'll do strips and that, which I will not apply the molasses. It'll be just my straight things, and then there'll be strips which has got the molasses and that. The majority of the farm will have the molasses added, but there'll be strips which won't have. On the flip side of it, I spoke to ADAS, who take care of our YEN program and everything, and speaking to them, they're saying that a lot of the trials that they've done, they have not found anything significant where molasses is improving yield and that. So I learned about it at our YEN conference. A farmer did it there. He spoke about it. He found that he had got a yield increase. It's not been proven, so that is one thing I've took from that conference, brought it back to my own farm, trying it myself, doing the trial, then I'll see whether it works or not for myself.
Okay. And then the last point I have up here is you need data. You need information to make decisions. If you're trying to increase your yields, you got to have some kind of knowledge about what happened, so that you can know what to look for moving forward, and then to evaluate did it work or not. So let's start with from the top of that list. I talked about planting date and how important it was. This is from a trial research study that we did looking at planting date, and we actually had seeding rate study here. This photo was taken on December 11th. So this is 5 different planting dates. So this is planting date 1 all the way to 5. So this was September 15th, October 1, October 15th, November 1, November 15th. What do you notice? Does planting date make any difference? You bet it does. So what do you want? What kind of plant do you want to have going into the fall? Is this okay over here? No, you want at least this right here. And this has got, you got your main stem here, and you got, looks like 1, 2, 3, and maybe a 4th tiller coming there. This one's got like 5 or 6 tillers. This is getting a little bit advanced, maybe a little bit more than what we need going into the fall. And if you had your wheat look like this going in the fall, I'd be a little bit careful managing your nitrogen in the spring, because if you got high planting density, that could be a recipe for lodging. But you want this, and the difference between this and this is 2 weeks. So how important is 2 weeks of time? You see any tillers here? No. Okay? So within that 2-week window, you went from having right where you want to be to not being where you want to be. So it depends on the weather you have in the fall. You know, this was, actually there's your dates. So this was October 1 and October 15th, but in those days will shift a little bit based on, you know, last fall we had a really warm fall, extended into December even. So we kept accumulating heat units. But, you know, hitting this planting date is very important. So the later you go, what you're going to find out is that you're going to have lower yield potential.
Yes, just going back to that slide, when I do my planning before I start anything, I'm with Dennis on this. So the October 1 would be the plant I would be looking to go into. I would be planting on October the 15th just because of the climate. So one factor which isn't on there is soil temperature. So as you saw on my slide, I planted, I can't remember the date, but it was in November and everything. So I missed my October the 15th due to wet weather, cold weather in October. We had a warm, mild November. Our soil temperature went up. So I got away with getting the October 1 planting in there because of soil temperature. I think it's a little bit more consistent over here than it is with us. Ours is very variable now in them months.
Yeah. So in terms of tiller management, one of the things that we talk about, is seeding rate. We talked about planting date and how, if you got to hit those early planting dates in order to get some fall tillers, those fall tillers are usually your most productive. Fall tillers will produce more seeds per head than a spring tiller. And so this is an example of a plant with a main stem here. You got your first tiller there, second tiller here, and you can see the first leaf of tiller number 3 starting to emerge out of that whorl right here. This would be where you want to be in the fall. You want to have at least 2 to 3 tillers in the fall. So how do you accomplish that? So if I plant late and I didn't get my tillering, because that's going to produce a head, that's going to produce a head, main stem's going to produce a head, tiller 2 is going to produce a head. Ultimately, we know that heads per meter squared, or heads per unit area, is an important driver of yield. We want the more heads, the more grains, the more yield. So how do we get there? Do we have to jack up populations? Do we want lower populations? And this is just an example. This is one plant in each of these cases. And this was, I want to say that was 800,000 seeds per acre, which would probably be, it'd be less than 250 per meter squared. And then this is middle, and then this is a high seed rate, and that's 2 million seeds per acre, which would be 500 per meter squared. So do you want this kind of plant, or do you want that kind of plant, or do you want something in the middle? What's going to do best on your farm? Well, we need to do a little testing and figure that out. Okay, and that's, so these guys that are getting these high yields, they're testing and they're counting this, and in the end, we're collecting, we do these head counts at harvest, so we know what the end result was. And what we're finding is that those high yield guys are slowly bringing their populations down, because what's happening is that you get this high seed rate, and you got more plants, but less heads per plant, it's less resilient. And it doesn't end up yielding more. It's like putting a Band-Aid on for planting late. Question?
A couple of weeks ago, I was up here at a meeting, and Andy Singh talked about
Yep.
early planting as you are now. And the question was asked to him, the fly-free day has not been an impact for years, according to him and Chris Alfonso.
Yep.
So when is too early?
Good question. So the question is, when is too early to plant wheat? And so we have this Hessian fly-free date. Hessian fly was a vector for barley yellow dwarf virus. The Hessian fly has not been a problem in the last 30 years. If you really know what you're looking for, you can find a Hessian fly once in a while in the field, but it's only like one or two. So it's just not been a problem. But we have these Hessian fly-free dates that we say plant on this day or after to avoid this fly in the disease problem. So I would say the optimum time for you to plant wheat is probably 7 to 10 days after that fly-free date for your area. Now remember, you got to play the weather, and it depends on how warm it is in the fall and how wet it is, and can you get your soybeans off, and all of those things play a factor. But if you could set your target date, I would set it for about 7 days after that fly-free date. If you can plant earlier, and what happens is you get this doubled. You get more tillering, and then you got these spindly plants that are really competing with each other in the fall, and that is a recipe for lodging in the spring. So you got to be kind of careful. So after that Hessian fly-free date, I'd say that 5 to 7 days after the fly-free date would be a good target. And we have the fly-free date for every county in the state. It's on one of our websites. I can look it up for you if you want.
So I know you said like with the first plant there in the spring, you'd say be careful with your nitrogen. But with that plant that big in the fall already, is there a chance you would run into like a nitrogen like you would run out of nitrogen in the spring? So there's a fine line, correct?
Yeah, correct. So what I've noticed while I've been here is that a lot of your wheat crops are brown. So if you had a wheat crop like September the 15th, you would probably have maybe, if you've had a heavy frost and that, you would probably lose 50% of them tillers and that. And coming out of the fall and everything, you would maybe end up with the plant like October the 1st and that. So then you would probably be able to stick to your nitrogen thing. It's sort of knowing your own farm and everything, going out to the field, having a look and that. So if I was doing my plan sheet, which I always have plan A, I don't think I've ever done plan A and that. So my plan A would show me the October 1, but if I had September the 15th on plan A, I would look at that and think, yes, I need to cut back on my nitrogen, which Dennis is saying. So in theory you would, but in actual practice, you have to get out to your field and make them decisions yourself.
And I would also say that, so you don't need to push your wheat crop early, especially if you have the October 1 plant. You don't need to get out there when there's frost on the ground and put your first shot of nitrogen on. Let that plant green up and grow. It's already got some tillers out there. So delay that nitrogen application maybe 2-3 weeks, and then get out there with your first shot, because it's just a better way to manage your nitrogen, because during that time where you're delaying putting that first on, how much rain do you normally get during that time? And you got snow melt and those kind of things. So you have less nitrogen out there at risk of loss. Rich?
Yeah, according to my notes, my wheat's in the ground almost 10 months, nine
Yeah.
and a half to 10 months. Sounds like yours is only in the ground about 9 months.
That
But you got a
that
lot longer grain filter.
that particular crop which I've shown today is slightly different to the norm, and that normally I would be planting on October the 15th and harvesting on August the 15th. So October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, July, August. So 9 months we would have it growing, and that rather than the 10 months.
The grain fill period is 50 days, 55, whereas we're only
Yeah.
20.
So my grain fill is determined a lot on, the grain fill is determined on the energy, so the solar kilojoules and the water and that. So yours is in the ground for 10 months, but this time of year, you're probably having one whole month where it's covered in snow, you're getting frost damage. So this month, that month is doing more damage to your crop than it is doing good, really. So what you're doing is you're going a month early to give you the insurance that your crop will come out of this bad month better, and that. So in theory, you've still got 9 months of grain fill, although it's in the ground 10 months. If you understand that the month you've got at the minute is stressing your crop rather than it actually growing.
From flowering to maturity.
Which I have that up here.
Yeah.
So from flowering to canopy senescence, which is growth stage 61 to 87, that is your grain fill period. I don't see your line
No, I
on
don't
here.
know why mine wasn't on for that.
But even if you take the median here of flowering, you're in what, maybe the 10th of June? And then the
Yep.
median here is probably last week of July. So you've got 4, 5, probably 6 weeks
5,
of
6 weeks,
of
yeah.
grain fill.
Maybe
4, yeah,
30 days.
Yeah.
30 to 32 days is typically what we get for a grain fill period. So this period is quite a bit wider, and you might not think that that the grain fill period can make that big of a difference, but it does.
He's further north, he's going to have longer sunlight each day.
Yes.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So the comment there was he's further north, which means the amount of daylight every day is more. So he's accumulating more solar radiation every day, and that is true.
And these are all key factors.
Yeah. Mark, have you always planted 5-inch rows?
As a rule, yes. I maybe did, when I was first developing my drill in the early days, I probably was maybe at 6-inch rows, and that due to some of my design factors and everything, because I stretched it from an 8-meter drill to a 9-meter drill. So I made alterations to allow for that. But during that 1 year, I realized that the 6-inch rows wasn't for me. I needed to keep it 5-inch rows. So then I had to do some redesigning and everything and get it back to 5-inch rows. So basically I took a normal Verdostat drill and basically used it a few years how it was supposed to be used at 5-inch. Then I thought I need to do some alterations. I stripped it back and rebuilt it to my own design.
How do you keep the molasses in suspension when you mix it in?
So basically, it comes in the IBC, so it's been filtered 3 times. So when I say molasses, it is the same molasses which you would be feeding livestock and everything, which is very thick and treacle and everything, but that molasses hasn't been filtered, what you're feeding your livestock. This has been filtered 3 times to make it more suspendable in the tank and everything. I've not done it yet, I've not used it, I'm going by what people's told me and that. So what issues I have, if you're coming in June and that, I'll be able to tell you about all the issues I've maybe had from it or what I haven't had from it. I don't know, but it's because of the triple filtration system.
So it's ultra processed molasses?
Yes, it is. No, it's not straight black, it's ultra processed.
So going back to the comment or the question about 5-inch row spacing, part of the reason, this is 5-inch row spacing here at these populations, and then this is 7.5-inch row spacing at these populations here. And look at the difference between the spacing between seeds. So if you take a 1.3 on a 5-inch row spacing, that's almost an inch between the seeds. The same population, 1.3 at 7.5, now you're down to 0.64. So that's moving that seed closer together. When you space that seed a little bit further apart, it allows it to tiller out a little bit better, and those tillers are better able to survive all the way through to harvest. So we don't get abortion of tillers. So we're trying to figure out what is the right spacing and configuration and trying to build a canopy that will maximize light energy capture and convert that energy into grain.
And soil type is also important. So back in the UK, we've got people who's at 7.5 and 10-inch spacing on different types of soil. So my soil, remember, is a clay-based type soil. So personally, what research and tests I've done is on a clay-based soil, and it works for me. Again, it is trying things yourself. I was talking to a farmer earlier, and it's something we've tried in Yen. So during Yen, you do quirky things and that, which you wouldn't do commercially on maybe one small field. So talking to one of you growers earlier, you have drilled in one direction and then crossed and drilled in the other direction. So rather than going out spending a fortune on a drill like there is out there, whatever row spacing you're at the minute, if you just want to see if a closer row spacing would work, just maybe on 2 acres, go one direction and then cross it and go another direction, do your own little trial on that, and then you might be able to see and understand what Dennis and I are talking about and do that, rather than going out and saying, oh, they must know everything, I'm off to go and buy a 5-inch drill. Because soil type is important, because if you're on a very sandy soil and droughty soil, 5-inch spacing probably isn't for you, because you could be droughting quite and that. And the research I've done with Australia and like the big areas of the US and that, which is your droughty areas, they're using like the seed hawk and that, which is doing a lot wider spacing to try and eliminate the drought and that, because if you've got too many plants and there's not enough water, then you're going to fail, where you need to cut down on your plants and with the wider spacing just so that they can utilize what water is actually in the soil.
Okay. Keep questions coming if you've got them in the back.
Does the wheat they're growing there need the same winter chilling as the wheat we're growing here?
So the question is, does the wheat in the UK need the same winter chilling as in like vernalization?
Yes, so we do on certain varieties. So I would say over 90% of our varieties need that. So if we was drilling late because of the season, like last year, a lot of winter wheat was grown in, was planted in February, and we had to be careful and we had to look in through a guide, which I spoke about earlier, what we have in Europe, which tells us, because there's some varieties which don't need the vernalization, but the majority of varieties do. So in the spring, if we were drilling in February, we would choose one which doesn't want the vernalization, obviously, so that it would grow.
All right, I'll go ahead and put up the data from that study. I showed you the picture of the plants from, September 15th, October 1, and so on. This is planting date 1, so that's your September 15th planting date. And as you move from left to right on the screen, it goes from 0.8 million seeds per acre all the way up to 2.4. So by increasing seeding rate, how much did we increase yield? Nada, not much. Okay, this is planting date 2. Any difference? Okay, here's planting date 3. What do we notice about planting date 3? Yield potential is a lot lower, isn't it? That whole bar is lower, and can we increase population enough to get back up to that yield? Nope. Here's planting date 4. There's planting date 5. Okay, so when we get to planting date 5, we do see a response to the seeding rate. So we do need a higher seeding rate when we're planting late, but can we ever get back to our yield potential of these first 2 planting dates? No. So this is why planting date is so important. And the other thing, we've been talking about tillers and whatnot, and just jacking up your seeding rates. There's 3 bars here. The first one is the target seeding rate. The middle bar is the plant density in the fall. And then the bar on the right is the plant density in the spring. So it's a measure of how many plants survive the winter. Okay? So you got, and this is meters per squared, but just call it low, medium, high seeding rate. So look what happens at the low seeding rate. What's the difference in those bars? Not very much. So your target seeding rate, you had about the same number of plants in the fall and in the spring, but as you increase seeding rate, what happens to the trend? You're losing in the spring in all of these cases. So you start to see it at the 160 rate, and then it's even more at 240, and then even more at the 320. So just because you're putting more seeds out there don't mean you're going to end up with more plants per acre. Okay? So we talked about heads per meter squared and how important they are. This is the data from the last 4 years in the yen. And this is the trend. So you got grain yield on the y-axis and your head counts on the x-axis. R squared value of 0.31. So as your yield increases, your head counts increase also. There's a little bit of variability here, but it's a very important factor in determining your final yield. So you want to manage to get as many heads per meter squared as possible. Okay? And if you don't know what it is, and you can use per square foot, per square yard, I don't care what unit you use, but do head counts so you know where you are. Somebody have a question? No. Okay. So we do what we call this top and bottom analysis, top 20 and bottom 20. We take all of the entries in the yen, we sort them from high yield to low yield, we count how many entries there are, we times that number by 20%, and then we take that result and we average from the top 20%, and then we average the bottom 20% just to compare what's different between the high yield guys versus the low yield guys. Okay? So the blue bar is the top, the green bar is the bottom group, and this is each year. This is average heads per meter squared. What do you see? What are the high yield guys doing? They got a lot more heads per meter squared, don't they? Okay? So is that pretty important? And there's their average yields in each year. So this last year, 141 compared to 88. There's what is that, 53 bushel difference between the average of the bottom group and the high group? That's huge. Did head counts play a role in that? You bet it did.
I mean, I don't know how you guys are doing your head counts and that, but to me, going out to count 900 heads and that, you'll get to 850, then you might forget your number. How I do it, I literally do get a half a metre and that, and then maybe do two or three rows and everything, and then multiply that up to make the metre squared. So
we actually, one thing, University of Guelph, we have a researcher that's using AI. We are going to be able to take a picture this year, half a meter above the crop canopy, and it will count the number of heads, and it'll tell us from a picture what our heads per meter squared is. So I just heard somebody go, woohoo! So if you've been out and counted heads, having an app that'll do that would make your life way easier, and it's way faster. And we'll be able to use it in research as well. That'll make life a lot better for us.
Will that app be available for us all?
The plan is it'll be publicly available. Yep. Okay. So we talked about biomass as being pretty important. So this is the relationship on the y-axis. You got the total pounds of biomass per acre, and then you got your grain yield on the x-axis here, R² value of 0.57, and that's your trend. So as yield goes up, you've got to have the biomass there in order to support that higher yield. You need more leaf area, you need to keep it green, free of disease, no nutrition problems, so that's capturing as much sunlight energy as possible and converting that into grain yield. Okay? So back to that top and bottom 20 group. So remember, you got the blue is the top 20, green is the bottom 20. How much difference is there between these groups? It's a huge amount of biomass, isn't it? Okay? So we've got to produce more biomass. And that was just the yield of them again. Okay, let's shift gears, talk a little bit about nitrogen. This is the average number of trips across the field by yen growers by year putting nitrogen on. And this includes if you put like MAP fertilizer out for phosphorus, there's some nitrogen in it, so we count that as a pass. Okay? So for the most part, we're up at most people are putting on 2. We have a few that are putting on more than that, and some that are putting on less than that, and I'll break that out next. So this is N41. Okay, yeah, so this is out of the whole group. This is the total amount of nitrogen being applied, broke out by year, so it was a little bit higher in the first year, but we've been right in around that 140 to 145 the last 3 years in total. That's the amount of nitrogen applied in the spring, average across all of these yen farms. And so, so the difference between these numbers is what was applied in the fall. So, so we're getting what, maybe 20 pounds of nitrogen in the fall, and that is really mostly from MAP. So does anybody have any questions about this? So we're doing 2 splits in the spring, and we're putting on about 120 pounds of nitrogen in the spring on average. The high yield guys are putting on more, but you need more if you got higher yield.
So are you typically putting any sulfur out in the fall?
We have sulfur, and we have some growers putting it on, sulfur on in the fall, some growers putting it on in the spring, some doing both. So it's a mixed bag. And so,
where do you see the best results?
best result, if you, I don't think I put that slide in here. Putting it on in the spring, I think it was a 3 bushel advantage compared to fall. But remember, these are not side-by-side comparisons. This is just taking all the farms that put it on in the spring, what was their average yield, all the farms put it on in the fall, what was their average yield, and then comparing those. These aren't side-by-side.
I mean, for the experience in the UK, we would put the sulphur on in the spring. I put it on with every spring nitrogen application. I wouldn't really put it on in the winter because sulphur doesn't really work at low temperatures. It needs to be at certain degrees for it to start working properly.
So I wanted to ask you about that. You have very high pH.
Yeah.
Sulfur is a way to bring pH down.
Yeah.
Are you putting on more sulfur simply because you're wanting to lower pH? Or
it is a factor I'm doing it, but the main factor to lower my pH is the sulfur in the manure rather than the bag sulfur or the liquid sulfur. But it is a factor which I do consider.
Okay. Question?
I guess his comment there, I was surprised. If I did the conversion right, he was using like 75, 85 pounds of sulfur per acre. That's like 2.5 or 3 times what we would typically, and I was curious your take on it. But if it's coming mostly from manure,
Yeah.
that's where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the numbers of what we're putting on for sulfur, it's around that 20 to 25. Sometimes we'll have a grower putting on 30 or 35, but that's getting to be high. And then if you look in the report, we have a table of what your crop nutrient removal is, so we know what the crop took off. And then you always want to look at that and evaluate, okay, how much did the crop remove and then how much did I apply, and just make sure things are in balance.
So yeah, just to help your question and that, so in my summary of my report, it still showed I'm low on sulfur, even though I've put a lot on. That is probably because I'm a high pH, I would have said. I would have said because the pH could be between 7 to 8 pH, that would be why it would be showing that I'm still low on sulfur.
Okay. Okay, so back to the...
Dennis, a question on your nitrogens and everything. So you're put only, so that I worked out is equivalent to 160 to 170 kilos per hectare, where I'm up at 210, and we in the UK have a window of 180 to 250 kilos per hectare. Has any of your growers done it at a higher rate, and is the reason lodging why you're having to bring it down due to your climate and everything?
So yeah, so that's a good question. We do have our higher yield growers are putting on more. I got to figure out where I'm going here. I'll show you a little bit of data on that if I can find it. Data, where is?
Because in the UK, I find that there is a limit in factor, and if you go over that limiting factor, you start to get yield deficit. So your yield, your limiting factor could be lower in the US than it is the UK. So if you went higher, it could affect your yield.
Yeah. So I don't have the slide deck on this computer here, but I thought I did. But yeah, no, we got guys that are putting on 180, which would be probably in the 210, I'm guessing, kilograms per hectare.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so back to splits. So this pie chart is the number of applications. So the blue is the biggest size of the pie. So that is 2 applications. The yellow is the next biggest piece of the pie. That's 1 application. And then this green one is 3, and then 4, and then 5. And then these are the yields. So a single application, the average is 111. You go to 2 applications, it bumps to 118. You go to 3, it bumps to 119. And then 4 is 123, and 5 is 124. So you can see as you increase your number of splits, your yield is increasing, but you reach that law of diminishing returns where it goes up and then you're not getting a lot of response as you keep splitting. And probably the sweet spot of where you're making the most money is here on this 2-split program.
From that, for me to look at that, weather would be a determination and that. So yeah, if you've got a wet season, the 5 would be the way. I wouldn't do 5 because it's not efficient and enough to do it. But if you've got a drier season, the 2 would be probably giving you the same response as maybe what 5 would.
Yeah, and so we didn't used to do a lot of split applications, but what we're finding is that by doing that split, we can account for what happened with rainfall. So if we've lost a bunch of nitrogen, we can make up for that when we come back on that second pass. And that's the reason for doing that.
Is this spring application, or is that taken into account for your gap this spring and fall?
No, this is just spring. Okay, I guess maybe that doesn't say that up there, but this is just spring application. Yeah. Yep. Question?
Well, and the question, you guys were talking about high nitrogen rate. 3 years ago, I had wheat, and I went to doing my own application, and I come in late, whatever you guys would all consider late.
Okay.
I wait till somewhere near joining. I try to get on before, but anyway, I ended up with a little strip that I had to do. So I ended up with about 240 pounds of nitrogen on where I overlapped.
Okay.
Whenever I combined that week, I did not see much. It was a little better, but it wasn't significantly better. Everybody says, oh, it went down. I said, no. This wheat variety was a really good standing variety. It stood, but the one thing that I did notice was it was about 2 to 3% wetter than the rest of the field.
And I suspect maybe a little higher test weight too.
Well, that year I had
So,
really good
yeah.
test weight wheat.
So you said it would have been wetter than that. So maybe you actually went in too early to harvest that strip. So you've gone in to harvest your field because it was ripe. You've now harvested that strip, and you said it was wetter. So that moisture would have been what I call nature, and it wouldn't have been ripe. You've gone in and harvested that before it was fully ripe, so it hadn't fully matured. It wasn't practical for you to harvest one and then come back and harvest things. I agree with that. But if you had maybe left that strip and harvested it 7 days later, you might have seen the significant yield increase, maybe. But it could also be the limiting factor of nitrogen, and that. So, like I said, in the UK, you get to a certain level of putting nitrogen on, and then the curve starts coming down. So if I started putting on 260 kilos of nitrogen and that, my yield would start dropping, and that it wouldn't go flat and that. It's because I've hit that plateau and that. So like I was saying, in the US, that plateau might be at a lower plateau than it is in the UK. I don't know.
But he brings up a good point. And the point, I guess, that or the point that I took out of what you said is that nitrogen alone is not the answer to getting high yield. So the guys that are getting high yield are putting more nitrogen on. Yes, that is true. That's a fact. But if I'm putting on 180 pounds of nitrogen and I'm getting 170 bushel yield, how many pounds of nitrogen per bushel? About 1. If I'm putting on 120 pounds of nitrogen, I'm getting 100 bushel yield. What's my pounds of nitrogen per bushel? 1.2. Okay, so you got to keep that part in mind. And so there might be something else going on in that field in that year that might have been holding your yield potential at a certain spot. And we got to identify what was that was doing it. And then you got to kind of think about the management overall of the whole thing. Okay, how do I start? You identify a few things, say, okay, I'm going to pull that off the table, try to remove these hurdles to try to bring yield potential up, and then I might find, oh, I need to put a little bit more nitrogen out there. But if you just go out and say, oh, well, I'm going to go from 120 to 140 by putting on 40 more pounds of N or 60 more pounds of N, you're probably not going to be very happy with your result. This is something that you got to build over time. It's taken Mark 15 to 20 years to get there. So there's a lot of other factors you got to bring into play here to determine, how do I build yield on my farm? Question.
On your two-pass split, what's your timing on that for each pass?
That varies from farm to farm, but generally on a two-pass split, I would say you want your first pass before stem elongation starts. So if you could get in there a couple weeks ahead of stem elongation with your first pass, and then hit your second pass, and maybe put 60% of your N on at that time, and then follow it up in between 1 and 2 nodes with your second pass. And I don't know, do you go any later than second node?
Yeah.
Okay, you do. How late do you go?
So my third pass will be just before ear emergence.
Okay, so after flag leaf is out.
Yep.
And are you putting on your 28% UAN?
Yeah, no, I'm 22% and 10% sulfur.
Okay. All right, streaming it on with like
Yeah,
streamer
yeah,
bars?
Yeah, with dribble bars, streaming
Okay.
it on.
Okay,
Yeah.
you don't see burn on the flag leaf?
You have to be very careful. So what I would do, so I've been told the molasses this year should help that, but what I try to do is go on a miserable day, so a dull, drizzly day and everything, and that'll prevent my scorch. And that I will not go if the sun's out, bright, sunny, hot day.
Okay. So a miserable day can be your friend?
Yeah, it
yes,
can.
Yes, that sounds great. That sounds great. Okay. Any other questions? We need to keep on moving. If not,
I'll make one comment. This is something you can try. I found in corn. I can go out and spray 28 on corn and never scorch it. If I wait till about 6, 7 o'clock in the
Yep.
evening
Yep.
and start and spray after dark,
Yep.
you'll never know that you even hit it by the next morning.
No, so basically that's what I'm trying to do during the daylight hours. Yeah, I totally agree. If I did that, it would work. Yeah.
okay. Anything else before we keep going? Okay. Okay, so nutrients added versus removed. So this is just N, P, K, and S. The green bar is the average of how much pounds of that nutrient was applied by all the growers in the yen. The blue bar is the average of what the crop removed. So what do you see? Did we apply enough? N? Yep. Do we apply enough P? Yep. What about potassium? Okay, so remember this is plus straw. So if you're not taking straw off, that amount of sulfur would be down here about, I want to say 23 or 25. A significant amount of the potassium removal is in the straw. So those that bale straw and take it off, you got to make sure that when you value that straw, you're valuing the fact that you have to put some potash back out there to make that up in your soil. Okay? And then this is your sulfur. So average application rate, somebody asked this before, 23 pounds of sulfur is the overall average, and 11 is the overall average removal rate. Okay? So we've already had a discussion about fungicides, but here's a little bit more information. We queried the data from all of the people. We've got 446 farms in here now, so it's a pretty good sized data set. And we said, what's the most common fungicide application method? So which bar is the biggest? It'd be this one right here. So 143 of those 446 farms are doing 2 passes, the early season and then the flowering. The second largest bar would be this one. That's just the flowering fungicide only. And then I guess this is next, which is the flag, leaf, and flowering. And then I guess 46, so no fungicide. Then we have some doing just T1 and then a few other combinations here. This is the average yield of each of them groups. So there's a few things I want to point out. So this is your highest, that's your highest yield over there, but remember that's only one grower doing that. So you kind of got to throw that data point out because it's only one farm. But here you got 17 farms averaging 124, but they're putting in I don't know what happened there. They're putting on all 3 fungicides.
The battery gone.
It did. Okay, I don't know what happened there, but yeah, pull that out. Wait for the what? Okay. All right, are we back? Okay, so so this is the highest yield, but let's compare. This is the most popular, the T1, T3. That's a yield of 122. Okay, there's a T3 only, and that's 115. So going from 115 to 122, you're getting what, about 7 bushels? Is 7 bushels of yield enough to pay for that early fungicide? I think it would be. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is we had a number of farms, 46 of them, put no fungicide. What was their yield? The worst, right, okay? So people that don't want to put fungicide out there, they're waiting, they're thinking that, well, the weather will cooperate with me. I'm not going to have a fusarium problem. I grow red wheat, so DON levels generally are lower and that kind of thing. It's hurting them, okay? You got to get fungicide out on wheat if you want to push yield higher. You have to. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. Let's talk a little bit about economics. Another comment I hear is, oh, these guys that are getting those high yields, they're just throwing so much money into inputs that they're just losing money. They're not gaining economically. So if we add, so what we did is we assigned a charge for NPK and S, and then all of these crop inputs. We assigned a value to each of them, and I can look them up if you want to know what the numbers are that we used. But we used the same numbers across all of the N growers so that we're comparing apples to apples. I know different growers can buy nitrogen for a little bit different cost per pound of N and so on, but we're using the same cost for each of those crop inputs across all the growers, and we add it all up, and what we find is that nitrogen makes up about 40% of the input cost across all growers, and this is just 24 only. I don't have that up there. This is just 2024 data. Phosphorus makes up about 14% of the cost, then potassium, then fungicide, the T3, and then PGR, herbicide, and so on as you go on up there, and those are smaller. So if you group the nutrients, it's about 70%, and if you group the crop protection applications, your herbicide, your fungicide, insecticides, those make up about 30% of those input costs. So, remember we did the top and bottom 20 group there? So we run these numbers on income for the top and bottom groups there. And so we said, you know, if you put a T1 fungicide on, we add the cost up. If you put a T2 on, we add the cost up. So these are the costs for the top group, and these are the costs for the bottom group for each of these categories, okay? And then we add these up at the bottom to get a total cost per acre down here, and what do you notice? The high yield guys are not spending more money on crop inputs, okay? And then when you factor in the yield, the cost per bushel is 2.08 or $2.08 compared to $3 and, if I can get that closed, oops. $3.17. So are the high yield guys just throwing their money in the wind? No, they're making money, aren't they? Okay. Question.
Difference between top and bottom on potash.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, right here. Yep. So why are they spending so much? A couple of things that come to mind. One, they might be removing straw. And the other thing that would drive these numbers up for phosphorus and potassium are, we have some growers in the south that are double cropping, and in the spring or in the fall, when they plant their wheat crop, they're putting on their fertilizer for their soybean double crop. So they're adding extra.
And the other question is with the plant growth regulator, how much does that reduce their biomass?
It's right. So with the plant growth regulator, it's all about timing. So when I put if I only use one in that particular year, sometimes I'll use two. So one is important, and I'll do that just at probably stem extension sort of stage. And the idea of that, it is strengthening my straw, and it's also helping my rooting system and that. So if you then wait until between node 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 and put it on later, that is when it's actually shortening the plant down. So it's just making the plant shorter, not necessarily doing the biomass, because biomass is the leaf and everything which is coming out. So when you talk growth regulators, it's about the stem more than the leaf sort of thing.
And what we find on the plant growth regulator, it thickens that stem. So the guys that are baling straw, you know, they would be like, no, we don't want PGR on it because we want, you're hurting our yield, basically, on straw. That's not the case. What we find is that it's more dense, okay? So you pack the same bale, it'll weigh heavier, you'll get a few less bales, but your net yield in tons is the same. So PGR, it changes your crop canopy a bit. It doesn't really decrease. Right, it does not correlate to the it does not decrease your biomass, your total biomass. Right, right. Question?
Can your PGR go on with herbicide or nitrogen?
It can go with any of the chemicals. You can add it to any of the chemicals. I presume you could do it with nitrogen. I've not done it like that. And normally, it's probably not the best idea doing it with nitrogen, but with any of the fungicides, definitely.
The most common application in the yen growers is a herbicide, PGR, and fungicide mixed together. And sometimes micronutrients in that as well, if they're putting micronutrients packages on. So that's the combination you see most frequently. Rich?
We had a little experiment in our neighborhood a few years ago, and people were trying to use the new pulse width modulation, I think they call it, the nozzles.
Yep.
And you could see when they slowed down dramatically, they were putting on a PGR, and the wheat was very, very erratic. So I think stripping it with nitrogen dribbles was probably very effective.
Yeah. I've seen that in the UK happen with that similar system.
Yep. Did you guys hear the question about the pulse modulating nozzles of tips, where as you slow down the what do you call it? I don't know, the pulsating, changes. And so he's saying you get like up, down, up, down, up, down on your wheat crop with PGR. Yeah. I saw another hand somewhere. Right here.
You mentioned this morning the straw not breaking down between the nodes or something?
Yes, so if you don't chop your straw properly and you haven't chopped between two nodes, that straw will not break down. You need to break it between the nodes, because basically imagine the straw being a bit longer and you've got two nodes here in the middle. It'll break down to them nodes and then it will just stop, and that it'll not break down unless you broke it. And that you can just literally snap it, kink it. You don't have to cut it. It's just breaking it so something can get into the cell lining of the straw.
So it's essentially waterproof, more or less? Is that what you're saying? That's why it doesn't break down?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. So if you've broken that cell line, something can get in there, and so water could get in there and help rot it down.
There's a lot of wax on the stem, and it takes a while for that wax to break down before the water will get in there and help break down straw. Yep. All right, question?
Anything about copper?
I don't have anything in particular on copper. We used to use copper products for fungicidal purposes. I've had questions about applying copper as like a foliar spray on wheat. If I go back and look, I probably have a few guys that are doing it. But in generally, we don't see copper deficiencies. And so I don't know that I don't know that I'm seeing any benefit.
Do you do copper testing when you're doing your yen?
Yes, we are testing for copper. Yeah.
But you're not seeing the deficiency, so if you're not seeing the deficiency, you don't need to do it.
Right.
So we sometimes see deficient in copper in the UK, so some people would add copper as long as it was cost effective. You've got to still weigh up your costings.
All right. I need to shift gears here a little bit. This has been great discussion, but I got one other topic I want to cover before we wrap up here for today. So I want to encourage you, if you have thought about signing up for the yen but you haven't yet, I'll still take registrations. We're trying to get it closed and get In fact, Friday of this week is our kickoff meeting where we're going to launch the 25 yen. But if you want to sign up, if you will do it today or let me know today or tomorrow at the latest, I will go ahead and get you signed up. It'll get you this 30-page report that Jody talked about. Mark went through his report with us this morning. And so as you might remember, there's a lot of data and information in there. So the cost is $300 to sign up. That basically covers all of the sampling costs. And then we have sponsors that, fortunately, we've been able to get enough sponsors to cover the balance. So we're able to offer that program because, like Jody said earlier, it's about $900 a farm to do everything that we do for this yen program. So that code up there, or that QR code, will get you there. GreatLakesYen.com is another way to get there. And if you want to see me afterwards, give me your name and address and stuff. I'm happy to do it that way. But I need to kind of wrap up on the yen, and I got one other topic I want to talk about. Did you have anything you want to add, Mark?
No, I'm fine. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. So just to recap, planning on time is important. We talked about high number of heads, biomass, application of nitrogen, sulfur, and fungicide, evaluation of your nutrition program, timing, be a good detective, and then have access to data. I'm going to skip over this one. I've got an example farm where the farm had a yield of 122.6 bushel per acre, which you might think that's not a bad yield, but he had a nutrition problem, and he would have never known it if he hadn't signed up for this program. So that's what these slides were going to be about, but I'm running short on time. So one of the things I want to get to is seeding. I still have people tell me, or they've heard other growers talk about planting bushels of seed per acre. So 2 or 3 bushels of seed per acre. I want to go through an example here of why you need to actually preferably plant certified seed, but actually do your calibration so that you're actually planting seeds per acre, not this volume of, you dump a bag in and you want 2.5 of those bags on per acre. So, Chris, if you want to come up, Chris is going to help me do this from crop improvement. But we want to get away from you want to give him the one, we want to get away from doing this on a volumetric basis. So, how do we calculate seeds per acre? We need to know 2 things: how many seeds per pound or the 1,000 kernel weight. Either one of those 2 things we can use to calculate how many pounds of that particular seed lot that you have to calibrate your drill for. And we also need to know the germination rate. So this is a actual seed tag off from some Jupiter white wheat. You can see seed count down here is 9,993 seeds per pound. The germination percent is 90. So with those 2 numbers, we can calculate the amount of seed. So the formula is you plug in your target seeding rate, you divide it by the seeds per pound, divide it by the percent germination, and that's how many seeds or pounds of seed per acre you should apply. So let's say your target seeding rate is 1.4 million seeds per acre. So in this example, your seeds per pound is the 9,993 and your germ is 90%. The formula would be 1.4 million divided by 9,993 divided by 90%. That means you need to put on 155.7 pounds per acre of this seed lot. That doesn't mean that all Jupiter seed needs to be put on at 155, because next year's Jupiter seed lot will have a different seed count. Okay? So you have to pay attention to that. So, but what about saved seed? We have a number of growers that are still saving seed. How do you don't know what your seed count is, you don't know what your germ is. How do you get that information? How do you know? So, here's 2 pictures, and if you look carefully at those 2 pictures, these were 2 entries in our variety testing program. What do you notice different about the size of the seed in those 2 pictures? Pretty remarkably different, isn't it? So, if you're saving your seed, you need to determine the seeds per pound or the 1,000 kernel weight. That you need to know the percent germ. So the seeds per pound, there's a few things you can do. You can weigh out a pound of seed and then count them. If you want to count seed up to 10,000 or 14,000, that would take a little time. Or you can determine the 1,000 kernel weight. So you count out 1,000 kernels, and then you can weigh that, but you got to have a very accurate scale, down to like 1/10 of a gram if you're going to do that method. So you got to have a good gram scale if you want to go that route. So,
For me, I do that bottom, but I'll count out 100 grains, and I bought a very small scale off eBay, and that for it'll be only a couple of dollars sort of thing.
okay, yeah. So there's ways of doing that, yes. But the point is, you have to do this math to determine the amount of seed. So, how important is this? Let's run through the example. And I know the 1,000 kernel weight of this variety, and I know the 1,000 kernel weight of this variety. So let's just say in this example, our target rate is 1.6 million seeds per acre. So I said this is 27 grams per 1,000 kernels, and this, let's just assume a germ rate of 90%. Okay? So if I do the math, 1.6 million seeds divided by 1,000 times 27, because remember this is 1,000 kernel weight, so 1,000 kernels weigh 27 grams, and then this is to convert, there's 454 grams in a pound, divided by your germ percent, you'd need 105.7 pounds of that variety to hit 1.6 million seeds per acre. So, am I going to need more pounds or less pounds to hit 1.6 million on this one? You're going to need more. How much more? Any guesses? About 50 pounds more. You're not too far off. So this one has a 1,000 kernel weight of 44.9. Let's assume a 90% germ. I haven't actually done the germ test on that, but let's just assume that for now. So you do the math, 1.6 divided by 1,000 times the 1,000 kernel weight, divided by 454, divided by the germ, 175 pounds. Okay, it was actually a little bit more than that. So to hit the same target rate with that variety, you need to calibrate the drill for 175 pounds. If you switch into the next field, you're going to plant that variety, you've got to back it off to 105. Okay? It's very important to hit your target seeding rate. So, take it a little further. Let's say you're planting a 100-acre field. So for the top variety, 100 acres times 105.7 pounds, you need 10,570 pounds of seed. On this variety on the bottom, you need 17,580 pounds of seed. So this is very different. So if you're not doing the calculation to calibrate your drill properly, you're going to miss your mark big time. And so looking at it a different way, let's say we just had our drill set at 150 pounds and we didn't care. I'm just going to dump variety number 1 in, go plant it, not change the drill, go plant variety number 2. What ending seeding rate would we end up with? Well, with the small seed up on top, we'd end up with a 2,270,000 seeds per acre. This variety would be 1.336 million seeds per acre, a huge difference. So it's very important that we do this. And I wanted to have just a bit of conversation with Chris for Michigan Crop Improvement, because you guys are in the business of cleaning and treating and certifying seed and whatnot. So
we do. So we test lots of seed, and the thing that may be overlooked, and if we're thinking about saving seed, there's a possible thing that would be overlooked, and one is seed cleaning. And so the pictures that you saw were all treated wheat that was different sizes.
Yeah.
If you're planting your own seed, it may not be cleaned, and it may not be treated. And the question I'll ask is a wheat plant a weed? I think it can be. And so you can look at a lake tiller, and the lake tiller is not going to perform like what you want it to do. A lake tiller is going to be at the growth stage, and it's, in essence, going to...
It'll rob yield.
It's going to rob yield, seed is not clean, then you have a possibility of not having good quality seed. And so, what do I mean by that? So, you could have seed that could be a shrunken kernel. A shrunken kernel is going to give you a wheat spindly seed, and that seed is not going to perform. You could also have a seed that could be diseased. We all know about scab and fusarium, right? There's times that, we do lots of germination, and a scabby kernel sometimes will grow, but it will be infected by that fungus, and it will retard growth. And so, seed treatment can help that, but that's also going to give you a weaker plant. And so if you're thinking about everything that we've talked about here today, optimizing yields with what you've got, you need to have good quality seed.
Yeah.
And so part of it is knowing how much seed you've got, but it is important to know or to have good quality seed, which is a function of seed treatment, seed size, and so you made reference to, okay, well, we'll just plant extra. Well, you plant extra, and to be honest, you probably get more weeds because you've got competing factors.
Yeah.
It's not working the way it should. You've got seeds that are too close to each other, that don't have equal planting distances, and so I don't know. Is that?
Yeah. So part of the issue is one, the quality of the seed you're planting. If you want to get these high yields, you need to buy certified seed. Because it's been run across the gravity table. Those little seeds that might germinate and come up with a plant that doesn't survive the winter, those don't help you, and then now you have a gap in your row. So I think there's value in buying certified seed. Maybe you don't have to do it on all of your acres, but the other question is more of like a legal question. So far, history has been you've been able to save seed from varieties from your farm to plant back on your farm. Some of the new varieties have plant variety protection that do not allow that. So you need to pay attention to that. I'm not sure there's police out there that are going to stop by and trace that back, but just be aware of that.
In the US, is that protection like royalties? So in the UK, if we home save seed, we have to, or we'll get in a mobile company who will come and dress it on our farm and add all that chemical to it for us. And they would then declare to us on our behalf how many tons we've done, because we have to pay what we call royalties, which is basically money which is given back to the breeder, and that so that they can then carry on breeding and keep giving us better varieties.
So my understanding, and I don't know if you know more about this than I do, I don't think with Save Seed there's any royalty collection on that at all.
That is correct. And so that is, in the U.S. we do have a different system. And actually there's also an additional component. So so there's, here's probably grown soybeans. And probably all the soybeans are, in essence, patented. There's a difference between plant variety protection, of which you can save seed yourself without planting, and then patented. And so nobody saves soybean seed because they're patented. Well, wheat is now becoming, they're putting patents on wheat now. And so that's something that, you want to look at the label and your sales certificates. But there are some wheat varieties, some of the private genetics now that are patented. And so that's something that you would want to pay attention to. And it really, there's, it does also come to a function of how much are you really saving. It costs a little bit extra for seed. But really, the grain price between the seed price for 2 bushels the acre, what
Yeah.
can I say?
Yeah. So I guess the reason for having this discussion was, you know, as a state, we want to try to raise our state yield average for wheat. We want all growers to be successful growing wheat. Part of it goes back to planting, and we've got to bring everybody up to speed on at least understanding the proper seeding rate and how to get your drill set when you're planting multiple varieties. And you should plant different varieties on your farm. You shouldn't plant your whole farm to one variety, but you got to make sure you're adjusting your drill when you switch from variety to variety. And then each year, from year to year, the same variety will not have the same seed count because it was grown under different conditions. So just make sure you're calibrating your drill properly so that you can hit your target seeding rates.